Hello dear students, hope you are doing well in your home. Today we'll be discussing a chapter from your half-yearly syllabus, Unit 5, Section 1, The Brilliant Iola. The Brilliant Iola is a chapter. It's about a lady who faces a lot of problem due to her skin tone or skin color, and how she overcomes all those problems, and finally how she becomes a voice to those voiceless, those who cannot speak up for themselves. Students, I think you are well aware about racial discrimination that is currently prevailing in America. It's an incident in the city of Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota in US, where a person named George Floyd was racially discriminated and he was abused due to his skin color. Now, what is racial discrimination? Racial discrimination is, you can say it as discrimination based on race. Race means skin color, or your appearance. That's more importantly your appearance. We see there are people with with a variety of skin color around us. We see people with black skin color, we see with brown skin color, white skin color, and there are a lot of things, right? We see fair toned people, and we see people with small eyes, right? So people the concept of racial discrimination is nothing new. We see, if you look back in the history, we'll see that the black people or the Negroes were often treated as slaves. They were sold in a traditional market, right? So in US, this slavery, or the black slavery, was ended by the initiative of Abraham Lincoln. Under his initiative, it was ended. Then okay. So the incident or the chapter of the Brilliant Iola is also centered around one of the main character of the chapter, that is Iola. So let's dig into the chapter. American Iola Bill Wells Burnett, born in 1862 and she passed away in 1939, was one of the most militant campaigner for the black right in 19th century. She spent only 6 months of her life in slavery. Although her father had been a slave for many years, Iola battled all her life to improve the status of African Americans. We see even the most impactful, even the most impactful blacks of the society has to suffer racial discrimination. We see Iola also had to suffer slavery for many years, for 6 years, and her father was a slave for many years. This morning, I stand face to face with 25 years of my life, Iola Wells wrote on her birthday in 1887. The first 10 are so far away as to make those at the beginning indistinct. It was 1887. Iola turned 25, and she was, narrating her own life. How was her previous 25 years of her life? So the first 10 are so far away as to make those at the beginning indistinct. She expresses that the first 10 years of her life was indistinct. The memories were, not so clear, not so sharp, right? She remember few of the things, right? Most of the things she have forgotten. So the first 10 years, the memories were indistinct. She doesn't remember much from the first 10 years of her life. The next 5 are remembered as a kind of butterfly existence at school and household duties at home. And the next 5 years, from 10 to 15 years, those were the sweetest time of Iola's life. She was a happy girl. She was having a good time. This was the best time of her life as per her description. She said that it was a kind of a butterfly existence at school and household duties. She was occupied with her school works, with her household works, and it was a good time. Within the last 10, I have suffered more, learned more, and lost more than ever I expected to again. In the last decade, I have only begun to live, to know life as a whole with its joys and sorrow. But the last 10 years, from 15 to 25, were the most hard time of her life, were the most suffering part of her life. She had suffered a lot during the last 10 years of her life. She had seen miseries in life. She had seen bad things in her life which she was never supposed to see. She had suffered more. She had learned from those suffering. She had undergone grief. This was a dark phase of her life. It was a mixture of both joys and sorrow. If this diary entry struck a new note of confidence, it was because Ayla Wells had found her vocation. She had a habit of noting down every incident or everything she faced in her diary, and her diary gave her her confidence to choose a vocation, to choose a profession, choose the profession of journalism. Vocation means a profession of journalism. Her diary inspired her, gave her confidence. The writing of her, the notes of her diary gave her the confidence to jump into journalism. For some time now, she had been writing for black newspaper about the concern of the black people. See, Ayla B. Wells was a black African American, as we have, as it is mentioned in the beginning of the chapter. So she had been writing for black newspaper about the concern of the black people. Now, what do you think could be the concern of the black people, right? The blacks were used as slaves. They were traded in the market. They were facing racial discrimination. They were treated very badly, right? They were considered as a low caste citizens of the country. They were, I think, no, they were not even considered as citizen once, right? They were treated so bad. There has to be someone who speak up for them, right? Who be their voices. So Ayla was their voices. She used to write for them. She used to write about their problem. She used to show the society through her writings the problem of the black people. Her entrance into journalism was triggered by an incident that had occurred 3 years earlier when she had her first encounter with segregation. So, apart from the confidence she got from writing the diary, there was an incident which left a deep imprint, left a deep scar in her life. And that incident forced Ayla, or you can say motivated, or finally made Ayla to step into journalism. The incident was, we'll know this incident, or we'll learn about this incident in the next part of the chapter. So this incident forced her or made her bound to be a part of the journalism. So be a journalist. Now, what was the incident? It was the first time she was facing a racial discrimination, a racial segregation. Wells boarded a train to Memphis to return to Woodstock, where she was sitting herself in the ladies' coach, the first class car, as she had always done. She began to read. So from these lines we can understand that Ayla Wells was a teacher in Memphis, right? She was returning, she boarded a train in Memphis and she was returning to Woodstock, and she had purchased a ticket of first class ladies coach, where she was enjoying her personal space and she was reading a book. She began to read. She had a pleasant weekend. She had a nice weekend at Memphis while teaching. Now she was returning to Woodstock. She had a nice weekend there, and now she was enjoying her journey in the first class ladies coach. She was brought up short, however, when the conductor coming by to collect tickets refused to accept her. Brusquely, he had told her to move to the car ahead, which was reserved for smokers and the blacks. So then comes the conductor, the collector, the ticket collector, or the train conductor. So as soon as the train conductor, he saw Ayla, a black African American girl, was sitting in a first class ladies coach, he could not bear it. He could not tolerate a black girl sitting on a first class train coach. So he said in a very abusive manner, he said in a very rude manner to Ayla to move towards the car which was reserved for the smokers and the blacks. So see, this was the level of discrimination back then. There were separate cars, separate compartments Everything was separate for the blacks. There were compartment reserved for the blacks and smokers only. If you in the office, there were separate sitting areas for blacks. There were separate toilets for the blacks, separate bathroom for the black. You know, they were treated like untouchables. No, the whites could not bear any blacks surrounding them. So this was the level of intolerance towards black back then. Angered by her defiance, the conductor grabbed her arm and dragged her out, only to have her sink her teeth into the back of his hand. Now Ayala, she became furious, she became outrageous when a mere train conductor treated her in such a pathetic way, in such a disrespectful way. She bit his hand and the back of his hand, and left the mark of her teeth back with his hand. When she braced her feet against the seat in front of her, he went to the baggage car for reinforcement. So when the conductor was trying to push away Ayala from the ladies first class coach, Ayala struggled a lot. She hold the seat. She even bitten the hand of the conductor so that he can leave her arm. The conductor was dragging Ayala by her arm and she was hurt. So when the conductor failed to drag Ayala out of the first class ladies coach, he went to the coach ahead baggage car. He went to another baggage car for reinforcement. Means what? To have some more people so that they can help the conductor to drag out Ayala from the ladies first class coach. So he went to the baggage coach for reinforcement. Reinforcement means what? To have somebody as your ally, to have somebody to help you. So the conductor went to the first class coach, so the baggage coach, and had some companies and took some reinforcement to drag Ayala out of the first class coach. It took 3 men to pry Ayala Wells loose and to push her out of the coach when the train stopped at the next station. When the train arrived in the next station, 3 men, they dragged Ayala out of the coach and they thrown him out of the train in the station. Bruised, she tumbled down the steps of the platform while her white fellow passengers stood up and applauded. She was bruised, she was wounded, right? She was bruised, she was wounded, she was physically hurt, she was mentally disturbed, right? She was shocked from the inner core. The very foundation of Ayala was shattered down. She was thrown, she was in the platform, she was badly humiliated in front of all those white people. She tumbled down the step of the platform while her white fellow passenger stood up and applauded. This was the mentality of the white people back then. Not all, but most of them. While a fellow passenger was humiliated and bruised, the other white passenger, they were making fun of her. They were happy to see a fellow black passenger humiliated. They applauded. They encouraged that inhuman activity. Ayala Wells returned to Memphis with the sound of that applause echoing in her ears. Her humiliation was more than personal. She could not let the incident pass without protest. Still secure in her belief in a world where justice would triumph, Wells hired a lawyer and sued the railroad for damages. Ayala could not bear this humiliation. Ayala could not, she will not allow to pass the humiliation without any protest. So she went back to Memphis with remembering those humiliation, remembering the sound of the claps. Applauded means clapping, right? Remembering she was, the sound of those clapping of white passenger, it was constantly playing in her mind, and it was making her even more angry, even more humiliated. So we went back to Memphis with the sound of those applause echoing in her head, in her ears. So she did what? After moving to going back to Memphis, she hired a lawyer. She expected that she would bring those inhuman people, bring those people who did unjust with her, she would bring them to justice. So she did what? She hired a lawyer and she sued the railroad company. She filed a lawsuit against the rail company. The case was tried before a judge who had been a Union soldier during the war and was sympathetic to Wells. Now a soldier, if we look at a lifestyle of a soldier, we see a soldier, they are often non-biased. They do not support the idea of discrimination in any ways, because they know how it feels like to be in danger. They protect the life of the people inside the country, right? So the idea of discrimination, they don't support it at all. So the judge who was trying the case of Iola, he was a member, he was a Union soldier during the World War, and he was feeling sympathetic towards Iola. He felt bad for what happened to Iola back in Memphis, back in the train. Finding in her favor, he awarded her $500 in damages, while the railroad appealed the decision. Well, flushed with her victory, wrote in an account of the case for the Living Way, a black church weekly. She had a simple point to make: if you stand up for your rights, you will be able to keep them. So the judge, he favored Iola due to what happened to her, and Iola came out victorious in that case, and the judge awarded her with $500 as a compensation for the damage that happened to her in the train. So Iola came out victorious, and she wanted all the black people to know that if you stand up for your own right, you can also be victorious. So she decided to write about this incident in a black newspaper, in a newspaper that was written for the black, the Living Way, a black church weekly. So the newspaper, a weekly newspaper for the black. She wrote, the name of the newspaper was the Living Way. She wrote the account, the incident that happened to her in that newspaper, so that the black will be aware of their rights, so they can stand for their own right, so they can speak up for themselves. Her article was so favorably received that the editor of the Living Way asked for an additional contribution, and she began to write a weekly column for the paper over the signature Iola. So that column that she wrote in the black church weekly, the Living Way, the article that she wrote about her incident, it was so influential. It was so influential, it motivated the blacks so much that the editor of the paper, the Living Way, asked Iola to write every week, to write a column every week in that newspaper, and she wrote with her signature Iola. I had observed and thought much about the condition I had seen in the country schools and churches. She later explained, I had an instinctive feeling that people who had little or no school training should have something coming into their homes weekly which dealt with their problem in a simple and helpful way. So I wrote in a plain common sense way on the things which concern our people. Knowing that their education was limited, I never used a word of 2 syllables where one would serve the purpose. So Iola began to observe the life of the blacks. She was a black, of course, but she was an exception from the other blacks. She was a teacher, she was educated, she was influential. She was, was not an ordinary black. And now, after writing in the Living Way, now she has a voice. She has a voice. She has a means to express her words and the word of other blacks. So she started to observe the life and the living condition of the black. So she had a feeling, she had a thought that the black, in order to stand up for their right, they should know what their rights are first. And in order to know what their rights are first, there should be something to read. There should be something to read. There should be something which enlightened them about their right. So she decided to write for the blacks, and knowing that the blacks were not as privileged as the white, they were not as schooled, as trained as the white, so she decided to write all those articles which was for the blacks, which were targeted for the blacks, to write them in such a plain and simple language, so that even people with very less education can read it and understand it. So knowing their education was limited, she never used a word with 2 syllables where one would solve the purpose. Means what? She never used any complicated words, any complicated sentences in her articles where a simple one would make a sense. So this implies that Ayala wrote for the blacks. Ayala wrote for the blacks in a very simple language so that they can understand what was written in the article, and she wrote about their rights, their place in the society, so that they can speak up for themselves. At first, her articles were confined to the local news, reports of birth and death, club meeting, reviews of concerts and plays, but soon she ventured to comment on border issues. Before long, editors in other parts of the country were reading Ayala's column and asking her to write for them. So in the beginning of her writings into newspapers, writing for the newspaper, she wrote about the reports of birth and death, the reports of birth and death, the birth and death reports, the club meetings, so the meetings in the clubs, the agenda, the outcome of the meeting, what was the topic of discussion in a club meeting. So she wrote about all this stuff. Reviews of concert and play. So the concert, back then there used to be plays, concerts, right, in the town, in the area, so that people might go and have a good time and amuse themselves. So she used to write a review of those concerts. Nowadays we see there are in YouTube, if you see there are people who review a particular movie or show, right, so that people can make up a decision to watch it or not. So back then Ayala used to write review of the concert, the shows or plays that people go and enjoy. It's not something in the screen like you see in theater. It's a live action play, a concert where musics and actions are involved. So she used to write a review of concert that were played in the town. So soon she started to write and comment on border issues, the issues of the black, the societal issue, the issue that bothered the blacks and the vices of the society. She started to write about the vices of the society. Before long, editors in other parts of the country were reading Ayala's column and asking her. So her writing were so influential, so precise and so impactful that other editors also invited her to write on their column as well. In the 1880s, almost 200 blacks newspapers were published every week. A handful were brilliantly written and edited, but even the poorest of them served an important function. The white press rarely printed news about the black people. Only through the black press could they learn about the events affecting them and an occasion take appreciate action. By 1880s, about almost 200 black newspapers were published every week. But not all of them were, very nicely written or were as impactful as the good ones. There were we can't say there were poorly written newspapers. There were good as well. There were less impactful newspapers. There were newspapers which have high impact. But every newspaper, even the poorest one of them, served an important purpose to the society, to the blacks. Because after all, blacks need to receive information from the society, about the society. So even the poorest newspaper provided them information. So, but the newspaper that were written by the whites, they do not focus about the problem of the blacks. They wrote about their own only, whereas neglecting the problems and issues of the black. Only through the black press could they learn about the newspaper that were managed, written, published and edited by the black. They served an important purpose to the black. From those particular newspaper, the blacks could learn about their actual problem and their solution, about the problems they're facing in the society. By 1886, Ida B. Wells' report on the life of blacks in Tennessee were appearing in the most prestigious paper. I was tickled over the attention I received from those veterans of the press. She wrote, I suppose it was because I was the first woman representative. So by 1886, Ida Wells, her reports on the life of, and by 1886, Ida's reports on the life of the black people of Tennessee started appearing on the prestigious paper. Means what? So Tennessee is a state in US. So the blacks of Tennessee, the state in US, Tennessee, the blacks of Tennessee, they were no different from the black of the other country. They were also the victim of the same racial segregation and discrimination. So she started to write about their lifestyle and their problems in the newspaper, and her writings were appreciated and were published in the most prestigious paper of the Tennessee. Means if we consider some of the most prestigious paper of India, you can say it's the Telegraph, the Hindu, the Times of India, India Today. These are some of the most prominent and most prestigious paper of the country. Likewise, the most prestigious paper of Tennessee back then, they published the writings, the articles of Ida, which she wrote, keeping in mind about the life or about the problems of the blacks in Tennessee. So they published her reports on those papers, and her writing were greatly appreciated by the veterans of the press. Veterans, if you remember, in the chapter while I was discussing P.T. Usha, I said you what is veteran. Veteran means what? The expert of certain field. The experienced people of any field are called veterans. So the most experienced people of press, means what, of journalism, they appreciated her writing, and she felt proud, she felt accepted, she felt very happy when those dignitaries, those big people appreciated her writings. I supposed it was because I was the first woman representative. She was the first woman representative for the black. Her writings brought her more fame than cash. She was still teaching in order to support herself when she was asked to join in a small weekly preaching the doctrine of, okay, we'll come back to that later. She presented the problems of the people through her writings to the society. She gained fame, she gained name, she earned fame, she earned name, but she could not earn much money. So she continued her profession as a teacher, and at the same time she continued to write for a small weekly newspaper, preaching the doctrines of self-help and thrift. As she had been taught at Rust College, she endeavored to raise the living standard of the readers. So she also wanted to rise, to uplift the standard of her readers. She wanted to uplift the living standard, the way of life of her reader. So she started to spread the ideology, spread the principles, spread the idea of self-help. She knew that blacks were discriminated not only by the people of the country, but they were discriminated by the government as well. So in order to raise the standard of the living of the blacks, in order to solve their own problem, so they have to help themselves. They should not be dependent on the government or the society. They have to be, they have to help themselves. They have to make their own aids, and they had to be very precise and very wise in spending money, in spending their resources. So she was preaching the idea of self-help, self-reliant. Yeah, to be very precise, she was spreading the idea that the blacks, in order to be to rise the standard of living, they have to be self-reliant. They have to be self-reliant. They have to depend upon themselves, not on the government, and they had to be very wise in spending their resources so that they can raise their own living standard. She endeavored to rise the living standard of the leaders. Her forceful editorials were critical of both the white and black establishment. So her editorials, her writings were critical, served an important purpose not only for the blacks but for the white as well. She wrote both for her writing were mainly concerned about the black, but unlike the white, she did not ignore the problem of the white completely. She also raised voice for the problems of the white as well. Wells received a rude shock when Tennessee's Supreme Court finally heard the appeal of railroad in her suit. Now back to the incident of the railroad. So she was rewarded with $500 as a compensation, and she came victorious in that trial. But now the Tennessee Supreme Court reversed the judgment, and she was shocked by the judgment. We think it is evident that the purpose of the defiant was to harass. Now the railroad was charging Iola that she had defamed the railroad. She had tried to defame the railroad. So they were putting a defamation case on Iola, which was quite shocking for her. So the railroad said that Iola tried to harass the railroad company. She tried to defame the railroad company, and she was quite shocked with it. Her persistence was not in good faith to obtain comfortable seat for the short ride. Reversing the decision of the lower court, they ordered defendant Wells to pay the court's costs. So the judgment that was made in the previous court, where Iola turned out victorious, it was reversed in the Tennessee High Court, and now she was framed guilty, and she had to pay all the costs of the court, and she had to pay the compensation. Now she is the guilty one. So see, even the influential blacks back then were suffering from racial discrimination. So think about those common blacks. They were not treated like human being back then. So the chapter was written by Dorothy Starling. With this, the chapter came to an end. So you read the chapter in your home so that you can improve your reading skill, you can improve your pronunciation. And if you have any question, if you have anything to ask, mention in the comment section below, and do subscribe to AL-HIRA National School channel and click the bell icon so that you don't miss any more classes. Stay healthy. Have a good day. Thank you.